Oh, there we are, okay. So, as you can see, and probably hear, I am born and bred Lithuanian, and I'm just home to visit my family. And so I'm doing a little bit of a light-hearted history of wine. Also, I come from the winelands of South Africa. Sorry, that's a bit of a conflicting story, but I was brought up on wine tasting. My first wine tasting, I think I was about 7 years old, and my father said, well, what do you think, honey bun? And I said, I think it's a little young. So I remember that. So, one thing I was thinking as I was coming over here, that wine's really very like people, if you think about it. I mean, if there's a crude, coarse, harsh person, he probably won't have very many friends. And if there's a crude, coarse, harsh wine, it probably won't have many friends either. For example, if you abuse wine, wine will probably abuse you. The same thing's true of people, isn't it? And then if you had a lovely warm Merlot, it would probably help you to forgive your enemies. And a lovely warm human being would probably do the same thing. But best of all is aging, because wine gets more distinguished and more beautiful the older it gets. And we're sort of hoping that's going to happen to humans. I mean, I'm working on it. So, well, funny thing is that God actually understood all this, because the first thing he said to Noah, when Noah, no, you're not going anywhere. I mean, you're staying right here. Don't try and sneak away. You sit next to your wife. I'm doing this for you, you know. So the point is that God understood that we can't live without these mirrors of ourselves, which is wine. And the first thing that he said to Noah, when Noah landed, oh there we are, when Noah landed on Mount Ararat, was go out and plant grapes. That was the very first thing. And Noah said, well, of course. And so Noah got his 3 sons to start planting and fertilizing the grapes. And there you can see they're pruning the grapes. And that's quite wonderful, really, the very, very first task they had to do. But what is really exciting is that history might follow the legend. Because if we think about the prevailing winds, now I know about prevailing winds, I was brought up with very strong winds, and in Provence there are 23 named winds. But the prevailing wind here comes from here, see if we got the right thing, from Judea, it's southwest up in that direction. So even if the ark had no sails or anything, any steerage, if it was floating, it would have been pushed by the wind up like that until it met the first high ground, which would have been in Armenia and would have been Ararat. So that sounds quite promising, but it gets better than that. There she is. Isn't that beautiful, Mount Ararat? Do you know that all mountains are ladies? Did you know that? So there's a really beautiful picture of Mount Ararat. And the thing is that scientists have found evidence of winemaking less than 60 kilometers from the base of Mount Ararat. And they've been making wine there for over 6,000 years, and that is longer or earlier than before the pharaohs in Egypt. So this really is the very oldest winery in the world. Where is it? At the foot of Mount Ararat. I would like to think that that kind of confirms the story. And there you are, just to prove it, there are the photographs of the vats in this winery. So there is, of course, wine. Wine is produced in that area. Probably a lot of you will know these wines. And that is a wine launch happening up on Mount Ararat by this wonderful man. He must be Armenian. His name is Garibanyan. So he is launching his wonderful wine on the slopes of that very mountain. Now, wine, it's not just that it's something we drink. We have embedded in wine a great deal of philosophical ideas. One is that wine brings civilization over barbarism. And that idea goes right back to the ancient Assyrians and ancient Persians. So on this panel here from the British Museum, what you see is one of the great kings of Assyria, King Ashurnasirpal, from the 9th century BC, pouring wine over a dead lion to symbolize this very thing, that he is bringing civilization over wildness. I mean, that's a terrific endorsement of wine, don't you think so? Because a lot of people think exactly the opposite, of course. So we are telling our story from the southeast to northwest. That's the trajectory of the story and the journey of wine, if you like. And wine then, on its journey of world conquest, is believed to have set out from Persia. That's not only true, but those words were actually written by my beloved father, the first line of his book on wine. So the Persian Empire is enormous, as you can see here. I can't see the pointer, there we are. So down here, right away from here, pretty much the north part of India, right the way through, and then it stops. I can't see because it's dark. It stops there. Can anybody see that little line? Can you see that little line, everybody? Yeah. Very important. That little line is the point at which the Greeks said no. Because the Persian king was determined to overcome Greece, because the Persian king was very envious of the Greeks. But the Greeks had freedom and they had democracy, and that was the thing that really scared the Persian king. And the Greeks fought 5 great battles, and of course, as you all know, they defeated the Greeks. That's why we've got the world we've got. So this is the Persian Empire, and all through that area, wine was being grown. And the very first grape then is Shiraz, named after the Persian city. So it was the earliest grape variety, and it's deep, smoky red and very rich, and it can look absolutely black. I mean, I had some the other day, totally opaque, pitch black. You know, like the stockings of a nun. You know what I mean? Solid. Very black. And if you drank that wine without mixing it with water, you were considered barbaric. By the way, unless you're Greek, is anybody Greek in the audience? No? Well, then you're all barbarians, I'm sorry. That's the Greek thing. If you're not Greek, you're a barbarian. And there's a very beautiful young Persian boy pouring his wine out of a wine bottle with a very long, thin neck. And you can see how elegant and sophisticated the culture was. But of course, the story goes on, and it was a god that brought wine from the Near East over to Greece and to Europe. And here is the god. He's bringing the wine in a Bronze Age ship, and the rigging has been turned into a trailing vine with bunches of grapes, and the crew, the sailors, have been turned into dolphins. And who is this great god that brings wine to Europe? He is, of course, Dionysos. And I would suggest that you are rather careful of him. He's a very dangerous god, because he will transform you into all sorts of things. So he's the god of transformation and of drama and of the mask. All those things transform you. And here he is dancing with his sacred ivy around his head. There, that's the ivy, and an animal skin, which is because he's all wild, and he's holding this very special wine cup down here. So this is Dionysus again, and Dionysus is teasing Heracles. This is Heracles on this side here. So Heracles is a hero. There's his club and his animal skin, and Dionysus is saying, I'm a god, you're only a hero. And by the way, don't try and steal my mug, because here is a very special mug that Heracles is trying to steal from Dionysus. And Dionysus is the only person who's supposed to have that mug. On the other hand, I'll just show you that here is a very beautiful cantharos from Magna Graecia in southern Italy. You can see what an exquisite and wonderful pottery cup that is. And I had a little hunt around, and I thought if you wanted to give one of these to your husband or boyfriend or girlfriend, you could, and you could get one on eBay, look. And that one you can get on eBay for only £785. But the thing is, wine is the drink of gods and heroes, but if you're not a god or a hero, everybody in Lithuania, of course, is a god or a hero. Is that better for the sound? Is that okay? But if you're not a god or a hero, then you become one when you drink the wine. That's the whole point. So in ancient Greece, wine was very, very widespread through all the islands, and it was strong. It was always drunk with water. It was mixed with water, about 1 of wine to 3 of water, and served at these drinking parties, which were called symposia. And the symposia was a lot more than just hang out and have wine. It was a place at which we discussed things like statecraft, drama, geometry, algebra, love, democracy, physics, all these sorts of things would have been discussed very seriously at the symposium. And it was only strictly for men and boys. Although there were some unofficial girls, of course. Oh. Hello, what's happened there? Right. So that's just a very quick look for you to see what the symposium looked like. People reclined, they lay down on these couches to drink, and the young boys galloped around on their horses. The thing was, these women were courtesans, and never say that a woman can't multitask. Just look at this. Here she is, she's thrown off her bra, she's sliding down backwards down a hill, and doing Pilates at the same time, and playing a game called Kotobos and gossiping all at the same time. So, very multitasking, Corinthian courtesan, almost certainly. Also, because they understood that wine could be dangerous, they put these warnings on the wine cups, and these are called eye cups. You see the big eyes looking at you, and in this great skiffos, you would have your wine and water, but if you drank it all, you would see a scene on the bottom, which would be a warning of what would happen. And I'm not showing you the scene because it's a decent wine fair we've got here, so I'm not going to do that. So as we move from Greece, it's better now, you can see me, I can see you. As we move into the Roman Empire, we're going westwards, and you can see that the empire stretches all the way from here, right through North Africa, which was Roman, right through Spain, which was also Roman, and all the way through here, through Gaul, and right up here to Hadrian's Wall, all that area. And through that whole area, wine was cultivated. So just to come, by the way, these are the boxes. I did it especially for you, because I thought you might find it easier to read than listen to me in English. You might find it easier to read these little bullet points. I can skip over them if you don't need them, or don't want them. So the point is, wine spread all the way through the Roman Empire. They had an army of slaves which cultivated the wine, and they believed that everybody should have wine that was a daily necessity, just like bread, including slaves, of course. So what they did was they democratized wine. And they also understood that wine had to be aged. And they had rules about the aging of wine. It's very interesting. It was a very complex wine viticulture. In spite of all this wine, gallons and gallons, they still imported the best wine from Greece. And I'm happy to say that the patricians, the aristocrats in Rome, drank Greek wine, and even better, they spoke Greek at home. I've always thought the Romans were bruisers, you know, a bit crude really. Well, you know, you've all seen these films about gladiators and everything. And I've never appreciated the Romans. I'm basically a Greek person. But when I heard the patricians spoke Greek, all was forgiven, of course, straight away. So they invented a wine press because they're very practical people, and it was probably more hygienic, and it was probably quicker, you see that the grapes were put between these basket-like layers and then pressed down. But people never took to it, and they kept on jumping on the grapes. This is a very nice mosaic from the Santa Costanza mausoleum in Rome. She's not buried there, by the way. So I think it's rather nice, I should mention this point, that the vines were grown in trees. They weren't grown along trellises, they were growing up trees. And in order to harvest the vine, you had to climb the tree with something that looked a bit like an umbrella. You know, you had to hook it. So if you were employing people to do this work, you had to sign a contract saying that you would pay for the funeral if they fell out the tree. I'm not making this up, it's all totally true. Everything I'm telling you is true. I did think this was funny because the Romans are great engineers. They built aqueducts and everything else, and yet they couldn't do a cart with 4 wheels, could they? And the dog on top of the wine is not there as a pet. The dog there is obviously to protect the wine. So just a few things. The wine was pressed 3 times, and it was the weakest pressing called Laura that was given to the Roman army and probably to the slaves. The white grapes were kept for the patricians, the aristocrats, and the sweet white was the most highly prized wine. Some of the wines, like Valerian, were so alcoholic that they would catch fire if you went near it with a flame. And I have that on the evidence of Pliny, who is a great source, by the way, if you want to read about ancient history. So the Romans sometimes flavored their wine with herbs and spices, or rather like vermouth or absinthe. And down in Provence, they actually grew them with lavender and thyme around them to make the grapes more scented. But the most interesting discovery I made was that they stored the amphora in a smoke chamber called a fumarium, so that smokiness would get into the flavor of the wine. And how is that for modern? Isn't that interesting, that they smoked the wine? Yeah? So, of course, the Romans called the same god Dionysus Bacchus, and he becomes very gender fluid, as you can see. And he is then the god of the Bacchanalian. Well, they had wine bars, just like we do, kind of public wine bars, where you could go and have a glass of wine. And this is in Pompeii. It was preserved because the eruption was so sudden and so comprehensive. So they had bars, and one of the things that I think is really shocking, not just that women were not allowed to drink, and that's probably true, was probably true in many cultures, but the fact is, this very sophisticated woman could read and write. And even a woman who was educated to read and write would not really be allowed to drink wine. So there's a rather grueling story of a woman, of the purse that had the key to the cellar was found open, and the purse was empty, and so naturally everybody blamed the mother, and they starved her to death, and everybody thought that was a very good thing. It's a bit scary. Galen was a very famous physician. He was the doctor of Nero, which is a bit of a difficult job, I would have thought. And he said that he never lost a gladiator because he used wine for washing wounds, for anesthetics, for poultices, and for all sorts of medicinal things. And probably Vynas has told you about that in his talk that he just gave. So that is really interesting, that wine has always had very strong medicinal properties. If we move on several centuries, we're now in the Muslim world of Omar Khayyam, and it's a wonderful thing. So the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, in fact the Quran, says that paradise is full of beautiful flowing rivers of wine. The only problem is you have to be dead to enjoy it, because as you probably know, alcohol is forbidden. So this is a wonderful illustration of the Rubaiyat, showing that it's all about women and a lovely glass of wine and a sunset and lakes and trees, and these words: a book of verses underneath the bough, a jug of wine, a loaf of bread, and thou besides me, singing in the wilderness, O wilderness were paradise enough. So you can see that wine is very much associated with love and women and beautiful, lovely places. Actually, I could tell you the downside of actually Omar Khayyam. He was quite keen on the real stuff, according to everything I've read about him. And when we come now into the Christian world, by the way, am I going a bit too fast? Are you sure? Because it was a bit stressy before we came in, and we started a bit late. Are you sure? I'm beginning to relax. I'm sorry if I am going too fast. And can you hear at the back? That's all right, everybody. Can you hear right at the back there? Yeah? Okay, good. So we're now going to come in, we're going west. So we're leaving that Islamic course. With the rise of Islam, all those vines were pulled up over the whole of Persia and all of the whole of North Africa and through the Near East. Now, as we come west, we're into the Christian world. And this is the most marvelous gold apse in a church of San Clemente, which is very near the Colosseum in Rome. And you can see that these twirling shapes, they represent the tendrils of the vine. The twirling tendrils of the vine. And they represented at that time in the Christian world the caring Christian community. As we look at this exquisite, beautiful, real gold apse, we can see other things. For example, what are all these white birds doing and who are they? Well, these white doves represent the apostles. You will see down at the bottom, which I've actually cut off, you will get some intimations of the Garden of Eden and the stream, but I've actually had to cut that off so you don't see that. So, while in the Christian world, we have another image here in which the grapes and the tendrils are more specific, because in the background of this lovely triptych, I haven't shown you the whole triptych because I was trying to cut down my slides, but you can see that the gesso has been cut and carved, and that it's a vine with bunches of grapes, and that is to indicate the Eucharist. That is there to symbolize the Mass, in fact. And that angel is in red because that angel is a seraph, the highest of all angels, and he's red because he is the closest to the throne of God, and because red is the color of God's divine love, which pours out of the throne. He's right up near the throne, so he's red, he's reflecting that. I mean, I'm telling you the background to the symbolism of all these things, because that is, people couldn't read. They could only learn by pictures. Nobody could read, everybody was illiterate virtually. So there is a seraph, and he's holding up the crown of thorns, which looks like a radiant sun, or possibly even a victory wreath. So the church became very rich. You couldn't become a monk if you didn't have land, because you had to give your land to the church. So really only aristocratic youths could join monasteries. That was not true for the friars, but for the monks. And also, if you wanted to be educated, you had to join a monastery. So Cluny was one of the biggest and most powerful of the abbeys. It was in Burgundy, of course, and you can see there an absolutely vast building. They had a very important prayer ministry, and of course they had to pay paid to have prayers and masses said there. Cluny was also right on the up and down path of the knights, of the armies, of the pilgrims, of trade, of everything, right in the middle of Burgundy, right in the middle of France. And down there is Bernard of Clairvaux. So the monks then planted the vines throughout Europe, and they did that because they needed wine for what? For the Mass, yes? For the Mass, for the Eucharist, which changed during the Black Death. When people realized the Black Death was contagious, the use of wine at the Eucharist was stopped, and only the priests had the wine, and that continues to this day, unfortunately. So, well, So Clos de Vougeot then was established by St. Bernard with 12 of his fellow monks, and he founded the Cistercian order of monks in the 12th century, and it now has 125 acres, and it's the largest of the Grand Cru. And that's just a beautiful abbey that Rasa will know as well. It's right down in Provence. It's the l'Abbey du Toronnet, which was founded in 1135. Think how early that was. Beautiful, simple, wonderful building. And of course, around that whole area, they still make the same wine, which is rosé. Are you enjoying your rosé, by the way? Good. So if you were a cellarer in a monastery, you had a few perks, because you had the key to the cellar, and you could pop in and do some tasting quietly on the side. So I think this is a marvelous miniature from a French manuscript of 1200 and something, showing the cellarer having quick taste. And the key is very obvious, you know. But it's not just a trivial thing. The water, most of the water would have had cholera. And so the giving of wine to the poor was an absolute act of mercy. And they would come and they would get wine in their jugs here. Probably went off very quickly. I mean, it's not like a sealed bottle. And they would get the wine and they would get bread. So that was a very important thing. And not only the local poor, but what about all the pilgrims who were coming up and down that route to go to Santiago? And what about the soldiers and the knights and everybody else? They all needed wine. So the Côte d'Or then is red Burgundy. I know that a lot of you will know all this probably already, but made from Pinot Noir and Gamay grapes. And the Côte d'Or also has a perfect terroir. It faces exactly the right way. And it's on the banks of the River Rhone, which is a main waterway down central France, and lots of trade would have been going up and down on the waterway. So a very quick shot, which you will see. This is the famous map with all those wonderful names of the great wines that we know. So you can just look on that. Now, as we go north, it gets colder, and we're going to find more white wine, and we're now on the Loire, and that is along the Loire where all the royal castles were, castles, the castles of Loire. And this is a lovely book of hours from the Duc de Berry. And you can easily look this up. It's a very famous book of hours of the Duc de Berry. So we're going up, and it's getting a bit colder, and we're going to have the white Loire wine. So it's grown in the colder northern vineyards, and Muscadet was probably the dominant grape, and it's still grown in the Loire Atlantique, down on the west side there, and Chenin Blanc in the central Loire area, and Sauvignon Blanc on the banks of the upper Loire. So those are the three white grapes that are grown along the Loire. The Sancerre, of course, is a famous Loire wine, but I must mention Muscadet is having a revival, but it has to be Muscadet sur lit. If you're buying it from any supermarket, sur lit is left on the lees. That makes all the difference, yeah? So we've looked at the great abbeys, how they got so rich, how they got huge amounts of lands, they had great vineyards. But if we look at the story of wine actually in the Christian story, it appears over 200 times in the Bible. Wine, vineyards, grapes, vineyards. Nearly 200 times in the entire Bible. And the New Testament begins with a miracle about wine, which is the marriage at Cana, and it ends with wine in the Last Supper. So it's quite interesting. The wine is so central to the story. And this is a little detail from a lovely panel by Duccio di Boninsegna, and quite interesting that all the people at this wedding are looking straight at the Virgin Mary, saying, "Come on, you can do something, can't you?" And it's quite interesting. And in the foreground, you see water is being poured into the jugs, and out is coming very good red wine. another version, just to show you, I like this one because it's by Giotto. And if I was at my own wedding, I might feel a bit awkward having the Virgin Mary sitting next to me. I mean, she was probably charming, but, you know, it could be a bit challenging, I think. But the Virgin Mary is busy telling that monk to stop drinking so much. Because here he is, and he's got a huge glass, whereas the Virgin Mary's got a normal-sized glass. And he is meant to be, is a Benedictine. Now, the Benedictines were actually given half a litre of wine for breakfast. It was very important for them to have wine. I keep mentioning the fact that they didn't have fresh water might not have been so good, but they lived very well, the Benedictine. So these are Italian artists, of course, from France, so we're now going to think about Italian wine. We keep on moving west, right? We're moving up. And Barbera and Barbarolo are from the north of Italy, and they are from the Nebbiolo grape. Montepulciano, d'Abruzzo, which is my favorite, and Chianti, further south, are both grown from the Sangiovese grape. Among many other wines and grapes, going right down to Puglia and especially to Sicily. Famous Roman white wine, Frascati, of course, was known as golden wine locally. So there are many different grapes throughout Italy. Now we can't talk about grapes and wine and drinking and all that without looking at Caravaggio. Michelangelo da Caravaggio, who was a bad boy of art, very bad boy. If you think killing people is bad, he was bad, but he was much worse than that actually. But he repented. So this is the young Bacchus painted by Caravaggio at the end of the 16th century in the Uffizi Gallery. And you can see from his eyes, he's challenging you. He's offering you this very deep, dark wine. Could it be Barolo or Barbera, I wonder. And if you look at the fruit down at the bottom here, I'm not sure if I've got a close-up, let's just see. No, I wanted to say that he painted himself here. There's a little self-portrait, you won't be able to, there's a little self-portrait of himself drowning in a carafe of wine. It was only discovered a few years ago. I mean, you'd have to look with a really big magnifying glass. But if we go back a bit, the basket of wine, the apples are rotting. I'm not sure if you can see that, but trust me, they are. The apples are rotting, and you've got, well, this is a fig leaf, of course. Figs are very sexy, generally in iconography, if you go right back. I suppose that goes back to the Garden of Eden. And then you have quite a lot of fruit. You have the grapes here, and I'll show you another example. But you can see the way he's looking at you, that he's really challenging. And of course, he's the young Bacchus, that's why he's got vine leaves all over his hair, just like that. Another vanitas, they're called vanitas because fruit rots and gets old, and the beauty of the boy will pass. The beauty will pass and fade away, just the way the fruit will rot, and sadly that is your lot. That's what happens in this world. So it is a vanitas, and he looks at us with a sort of longing. We hope that he will always be beautiful. You come to this great painting, it's the last one I'm going to show you from Caravaggio, is that the Christ figure is looking down at a basket of fruit. That seems a bit unusual, doesn't it? Why is he doing that? Well, the basket of fruit represents the world here, and all the fruit is, I'm not sure if I've got a detail. Yeah, you can see all the fruit is very symbolic. You've got, again, the rotting apple for the Garden of Eden, figs again, as I already mentioned, and the pomegranate, symbolic of the passion, and the fig leaf on the side from the great I am the true vine. Remain in me and I will remain in you. And then most interesting, if anybody spotted it, which you may have done, is the shadow. What is the shadow of? Of a? Very good, who said fish? Excellent, it is exactly a fish. That's interesting because Because two things, the fish was the very first symbol for Christ. At the time when the Christians were being persecuted, burnt alive, thrown to the animals in the Colosseum, painted with tar and tied to poles to light Nero's garden. During the persecutions, they had to be very careful. So one person would, if I'm talking to you and I think, you could, I just swing my sandal in the gravel like that while I'm talking to you, and then I stand back. And if you swing your toe the other way, you will be making a fish. And if that happened, then it was safe to talk. So the fish in Greek is ichthys, and it's an acrostic for Jesus Christ, Son of God, Saviour, in Greek and Latin, in fact. So that's why that's there. And after this painting, this naughty Caravaggio never put a foot wrong, and he never painted any more pagan painting. So that's the Supper at Emmaus. Please see it when we come to London. So we go on up to a much more secular kind of world of the Flemish and the Dutch, and we go up the canals and we avoid Paris. The reason for that was that Paris taxed the wines. So to avoid the tax, they would go up the canals, past Paris, and up to Burgundy. I don't know whether you're hearing that okay. So, and up there, of course, they were going to be drinking white Burgundy, made from Chardonnay and Egly-Ouriet grapes. And when I see wine drinking in Holland, it's always lots of fun, people laughing and singing, playing musical instruments, flirting, and so on. And the glass is almost, the wine is the very center of the painting. So that is quite nice to think that in Holland they had a very relaxed kind of culture and they were able to enjoy a glass of wine. I do think it's nice, the wine is being poured out, looks very light there, and the man is allowing his hand just to drift south in a rather convenient way over the breast of the woman. And the two men on either side are looking out at us and bringing us into the party. Also in Holland, wine was part of the courtship ritual, and if you gave somebody a glass of wine, a girl I mean, and she drank it and enjoyed it, then she'd probably marry you. So you have to be a bit careful about that. I mean, do I really want to give her a glass of wine? So this is a young cavalier who's hoping that this girl will say yes, but we have exactly the reverse in this one. It's called Easy Come, Easy Go, where the woman, who has definitely been around the block a few times, is inviting the man, and he's laughing and saying, "You must be joking." But you can see she's got a black spot on her head, which means she's ill. Okay, now the Dutch built a trading empire. This is a marvelous picture. And the trading empire was going all the way to the East Indies to get the spices and bring them back. And it had to go across the, sorry, this is very boomy, isn't it? There's a lot of huffing and puffing going on. Can you still hear me on that, like that?
Yeah.
I know I'm fiddling, but it's irritating. So they went through the equator twice, on the way down, around Africa, and on the way up. And nothing survived, the wine and the food and everything else. So they had to have a food and wine station at the Cape, on Cape Province. And there is in the distance the mountains. This lovely Dutch galleon is actually in Table Bay, Cape Town. And they went there, and that's where they started to plant the wine, and we have over 350 years of Cape wine. Just to tell you that the Cape Province, South Africa, is older than America. I get very annoyed when people talk about New World wine. What's New World about that? It's only 400 years old. So the thing that really made all the difference and fits in with my philosophy that something good always comes out of something bad was the persecution of Huguenots by the Catholic Church. The Huguenots, a genocide was unleashed by the Dukes of Guise. Sorry, that's my name, it's embarrassing, but never mind. The Dukes of Guise unleashed this terrible genocide in Paris on the night of St. Bartholomew. And it lasted for 3 weeks, and over 30,000 people were killed. Protestants. And the Protestants were all from the south, and they were the leaders of the people. I mean, they were the aristocrats. You could tell them because they always wore black. They were Protestants, so they were all killed. So the Dutch gave them the chance to go to the Cape, which they did, and that's where they started to set up vines and vineyards and make wine, which they still do. And that is for Jan van Riebeck, who's the first person, the founder, if you like, of the Cape. And he wrote, and he was only 40 years old, on the 2nd of February 1659, he wrote in his diary, "Fine warm weather today, praise be to God. Wine was made for the first time from Cape grapes, namely from the new must, fresh from the vat. The grapes were mostly muscadel and other white round grapes, very fragrant and tasty." Isn't that very emotional? The beginning of big wine, wineries in South Africa. The architecture is absolutely exquisite. Wonderful, wonderful Cape Dutch architecture of the homesteads. This was the governor's homestead. And look at that for architecture. Just look at the simplicity. Absolutely exquisite, and the balance. So that was the background, and they made one wine at least, Constantia, which was drunk by the nobility of Europe, from Peter the Great, Napoleon, right through to George IV. In England, things weren't going so well. The water was all polluted, and people drank beer and gin, and that's why William Hogarth produced all his etchings to sort of bolster people up morally, if you like. And this is just an etching from the Rake's Progress, which was one of his very famous series of etchings about the decline of somebody if they take a few wrong turns morally. So the English drank Bordeaux, and Bordeaux was of quite white. They called it claret because it was quite light, and it was made from Cabernet Sauvignon, and it's now made from Cabernet Franc and Merlot, I think, and I can be corrected on that. For 300 years, the wines coming up from Gascony sailed up the English Channel to the port of London. Why? Because that whole part of France belonged to England. The map is incredible. It shows you here that right from here all around, I mean an enormous chunk of France was English, because Eleanor, her husband who was the King of France, died, and then she married Henry II of England, became Queen of England, and all of that was English. So the wine came from there. But unfortunately, the French king later on was persecuting Protestants, and England was a Protestant country, and so William of Orange punished them with high taxation, and the result was gout, because he then started importing port from Portugal, or Portuguese wine, which was quite different from French wine, and that gave a lot of people gout in the 18th century. Where are we going now? So anyway, we must talk about champagne, and I hope that, do you want to, somebody else come in? No, please sit down. Just sit down. I'd rather people sat down than, yeah. So champagne, I have to be a bit difficult, dangerous, because I've got Rasa there. She is the queen of champagne, as we all know. But champagne is made from the black Pinot Noir grapes, or round grapes, as far as I know. And it was allegedly invented in the Royal Cathedral of Reims by a monk called John Perrin, and everybody knows that story. But wait a minute. It was originally a sweet wine to which candy was added, but the English milords preferred to have it dry, and the English milords were coming over to France to buy it. But now this is the shocker, which some of you will know. No, not quite, but there is Dom Perrin with the fizzy wine, and he did all he could to get the bubbles out of the champagne, because his horrible bubbles were spoiling his wine. There is Madame Clicquot she invented the dégorgement, and she looks very grumpy indeed, I must say. But this is the challenge. Could champagne have been introduced to the world by a 17th century Englishman and not invented by a French monk in near Reims? because this doctor, whose name was Dr. Christopher Merritt from Gloucestershire, recorded in 1662, 30 years before the French Benedictine monk, Dom Perignon, alleged to discover champagne in 1697. So champagne was invented in England by an English doctor. And recently, or relatively recently, English champagne, I know it can't be called champagne because of legal copyright. May I just put in brackets, the very fact that it can't be called champagne was set up by an English firm of lawyers, the very one that my son worked for when he first started out in law. It was very funny. The French came to an English law firm to establish their right over the word champagne. Anyway, there it is in Sussex, and of course it's Ridge View, and these are some of the awards. Best champagne in blind tasting in 2010, best bottle fermented sparkling in 2005 and 2011, best English sparkling in 2012, best English producer in 2000, 2002, and on, best international sparkling rosé, and so on and so on and so on. Just an absolutely winning streak. So from that high level of achievement, we're down to your basic vin de table, or vin ordinaire. Remember, after the revolution, everyone wanted to pretend to be a peasant. You just didn't want to pretend to be an aristocrat, because you might, actually get your head cut off. It's very interesting that. So they all sat on the grass and had picnics and probably spoke vulgar French and so on. And they drank this very mixed wine, which we just call vin ordinaire. And you can see you took off your shirt, you put the dog on the table, France had changed our war recognition. And here they are having a wonderful meal on a barge on the River Seine. They're having leisure. You may not realize this, folks, but leisure was a totally new concept. Nobody had leisure before the second half of the 19th century. Well, the aristocrats didn't have leisure because they didn't work, so they didn't have leisure. And the workers didn't have breaks, so they didn't have leisure. You see? But the idea of leisure, where you chill out, you meet people, was a very new concept. And this is the ultra-modern painting by Renoir in the Phillips collection in Washington, showing the kind of relaxed society that was developing. After you'd had your lunch, you then had to do something quite risky. You had to walk across there. Well, there are some rails. There's no rails here. You had to walk across this little island, was called the Camembert, of course. You had to walk across the Camembert. You had to walk along here to get the other side without falling in and without taking your top hat off. And when you look at this painting by Monet, you can see that the absolute overriding interest of the French Impressionists was the movement of light on water, because water is wobbling, so the light waves are shaking around, and the brushstrokes get faster, the world is speeding up, and they wanted to reflect that, the sort of effervescent speed of the new world. Having a picnic in the sun was de rigueur if you were living in the 1870s. And there they are, a very nice déjeuner célèbre by Monet, lacking a naked woman though, don't you think? If you think of the famous one, which was by Manet, we had the naked woman, Victorine, her name was, right in the front. I'm just going to show you. By the way, at this point we've actually got corkscrew, look. Corkscrews have now been invented. Oh, sorry, I don't know how that got in. It's a pastiche, of course, of Manet's déjeuner célèbre. The woman is Victorine Moreau, and she knows you're looking at her, and you know she knows you're looking at her, and you're all male, because the art world's all male, and she doesn't care. And she's chucked off her dress, and the basket next to her is tipped up, which you can't see in the cover. The tipped up basket with the fruit rolling out of it is a trope from the Renaissance, which is an indication of spilt purity. In other words, we know what that means. And then the woman in the back contrasts standing in water for purity, wearing white for purity, bowing for humility in complete control. In Paris, you didn't take your top hat off wherever you went. You just kept your hat on, And this is a typical flaneur of the boulevard with his limp wrist, casting his eye around to see who else is there, with a poor little girl from the country who's trying to smoke and drink and be very modern. But as you can see, it's not only wine, although the man seems to have wine in front of him. This little one by Manet is my last, just my second from last picture, if you can give me 1 more minute to finish. It is of a woman wearing a hat and sitting at a marble table. Can anybody work out why that isn't quite okay? Is she at home or is she out? I'm going to get you to work on this. My last. Is she at home or is she somewhere out? Out. How do you know she's out? Very good, excellent. And the table, she wouldn't have a marble table, would she? If she's out, why is she alone? She wouldn't be alone if she's going out, would she? Well, that's a possibility. But look, she's smoking, but she isn't smoking because the cigarette's not lit. She's on the pool. Yeah, exactly. You can all do that. So that's what's happening. So there she is with an unlit cigarette, and what's more, that has got alcohol in it. So she's drinking alcohol alone with the cigarette. That's shocking. Absolutely shocking in Paris. Well, I must get out your hankies and your Kleenex. It's very sad. This is the last painting by Manet before he died, and I think it's the last painting I'm showing you. It's the end of my story, almost. She's at the bar at the Folie Bergère, and her name was Maxine. I called her Maxine when I first met her, when I was about 17. That's actually, her real name was Suzanne, but never mind. She's still Maxine for me. And she's very unhappy. And I want to know, is that a very quiet painting, or is it very noisy and busy? What do you think? So people are divided. Some people think it's noisy and some people think it's very quiet. It depends on whether you're on her side. For her, she's in a kind of bubble. She's very sad. She's probably got the hair of her mother's head in her locket around her neck with the black ribbon. And we can hear all the noise, going on behind her, but she can't. And she's looking out at this. And it's a painting about reflections, because we are looking at the reflection of the bar that she's looking at, but we're also looking at her reflections, her thoughts about her life. She is imagining a man coming up to her. It's a very, very hostile. He's looking straight in the eyes, he's holding a stick, he's got a gloved hand, and that looks quite frightening. The reality wasn't that. Actually, he was a funny little chap like that. But he might not be there at all, or maybe she wishes he'd come. And she's standing like that behind the bar. But what I wanted to mention, and you probably won't take this, you probably won't like this, but the point is, Manet trained in the Louvre, and he trained by copying painting. And he copied a lot of paintings by Giovanni Bellini, who painted many Madonnas. Madonnas were always set behind an altar, like a marble balustrade or something like that, always, with darks right in the center, triangular, with some kind of a veil like that. I looked at that one day and I thought, she looks like a Giovanni Bellini Madonna. Maybe what Manet's doing is lifting her up, lifting her out of the world she's in, where she's going to get syphilis and die pretty soon, and making her into a Madonna, and repenting for the many times he'd used women just like her, and the reason he was dying, which was syphilis. So there's a kind of backstory to the whole painting. And the very, very dark black, it's very, very sort of formal. Lots of indications of purity. The water, the flowers, the white skin, the face and everything else. She doesn't look like a Barney. So Manet, unfortunately, got very bad complications. They put him on his dining room table and cut his leg off with a saw. And his brother was there. Well, of course, he got gangrene and died. So rosé, to end with a cheerful note, we quickly get on to Provence. That rosé, which is made on this hot clay kind of ground with the hot sun of Provence and the scent of the pine trees and the rosemary and the thyme, all of that is coming into the rosé wine. And it's made of 3 grapes, Cinsault, Grenache, and Syrah. Cinsault, as Rosa told you. And the one painting that where is my roses? Somebody gave me some. Is it here? No, I think you've given it to me. This is it. No, this is it. I've got it. There we go. So I'm just going to help myself through this last one. So this is a very, very wonderful painting by Vincent van Gogh, who lived in Provence, as you might know, and what he's painting the vendange. And the vendange is when everybody comes out to harvest the grapes. When you see it, what you see is unity, community, history, tradition. And hang on. What you see is everything that Van Gogh didn't have in his own life. He was always an outlier, wasn't he? And you see people are bending in an attitude of humility, women. They are bending to the toil they've always done for millennia. And you can see that as the sun shines on the road, which is it's not a river, it's a road, because it turns into a canal. And I had a brilliant revelation. Because I've been looking at art and working with art all my life from the age of 2, making it a study. I looked at that and I thought, I don't think Van Gogh ever saw Provence. What he saw was a dream of his own beloved, but his own beloved Holland. And he turned Holland into a sort of sunlit Provence. He makes a painting, because it's very like a Bruegel or any other Dutch painting where you see peasants working. I mean, you probably know those paintings. So that's what I thought about that. And as we end, I'm just going to say one thing about the miracle of this particular Vyno dienose, if I may, without embarrassing anybody. The fact is, it was an impossible dream to bring wine drinking to the Baltic. Here we have a country that has 4 foot of snow in the winter. How can the Baltic ever be a wine drinking country? But miracles only happen through love. And it was the love of 2 people for each other and for wine that made all this happen. Here we are, 20 years later, with the greatest wine fair anywhere. 6,000 people here today. And that was the miracle. So I really have to drink a toast to my beloved family, Rosa Arunasan family, and the team who have done all this for the sake of this wine. You take a raw, green, sour fruit and you turn it into Châteaubriand. It's like taking ground up bits of earth and making a beautiful altarpiece of something that will endure. It's a great achievement of the human race. Thank you all very much for listening.